Desastres. O automóvel tem um século de existência. Durante esse período alterou o mundo, alterou o modo como vivemos, onde vivemos e transformou o aspecto das nossas cidades e zonas rurais. Tem sido uma invenção maravilhosa e libertadora, mas também trouxe uma tristeza incalculável. 25 milhões de mortos em todo o mundo, número sempre a aumentar. Foi preciso meio século para se ter consciência deste facto. Agora, tenta-se controlar o apetite insaciável do automóvel em relação à vida humana. Colocar o tigre de volta na sua jaula. O Mercedes Classe S é um dos carros maiores e mais fortes do mundo. É também um dos mais seguros. No entanto, em Paris, no dia 31 de agosto do ano passado, nada disto foi suficiente para evitar que 3 dos seus ocupantes morressem num dos acidentes mais famosos de todos os tempos. Milhões de palavras foram escritas acerca dos acontecimentos anteriores e posteriores a este acidente. Contudo, esquecendo a identidade das vítimas, a dura realidade foi a mesma que muitos de nós enfrentam diariamente. Num acidente de automóvel, quem sobrevive, quem morre e porquê? O professor Murray Mackay, um dos mais importantes investigadores de acidentes rodoviários da Grã-Bretanha, está em Paris. Através dos dados fornecidos pela polícia, fez a primeira reconstituição detalhada daquilo que aconteceu no túnel.
According to the accident investigators, this is where the accident began.
About 20 past midnight, the Mercedes is coming along this road on the left bank of the Seine towards the Alma Bridge. It heads down towards the underpass, and it's estimated at that time it speeds about 70 miles an hour. What happens next is based on the evidence that we have so far. As he comes down into the tunnel, he's faced with a slow-moving Fiat. He steers to the left. Because he's just come over a crest, the steering's light, he probably puts in too much steering, so he's heading towards the center columns. He corrects right, and now he's heading directly for the Fiat Uno.
O Mercedes embateu de lado no Fiat, partindo o seu próprio espelho lateral e quebrando o farol traseiro do Fiat. Até aqui, fora apenas uma colisão sem importância.
Was the Fiat just an innocent motorist returning late at night, or was there something more sinister than that? We may never know. The French police have given up the search for that vehicle. What we do know is that at this time in the accident sequence, the actions of the driver of the Mercedes were not those of somebody who was normal and alert.
Uma marca de derrapagem de cerca de 30 metros mostra que o condutor do Mercedes virou o volante para a esquerda. Nessa altura, o carro subiu o passeio e colidiu de frente contra a 13ª coluna. O carro virou-se e acabou por ficar em sentido contrário. Pensa-se que o Fiat continuou a sua viagem sem parar.
Speed, a driver under the influence of alcohol, the unexpected encounter with the Fiat, these all played their part. But you must remember that from the time the car entered the tunnel until it came to rest after the impact, that's only about 2 seconds. Newspapers have talked luridly of speeds of 120 miles an hour, but looking at the damage tells a very different story. It suggests an impact with the pillar of about 60 miles an hour. And we know that the car came to rest about 15 feet from the pillar, spinning out, and that means about 10 miles an hour exit speed from the pillar. So the change in velocity was slightly less than 50 miles an hour. And it's that change in velocity which is crucial in terms of the severity of the crash to which the occupants were exposed. This was a severe but a survivable accident, and what we now need to consider is why did 3 people die?
Strangely, Princess Diana, sitting where I am in the right rear, had the best chance of survival because the impact was concentrated on the left front of the car, and as it hit the pillar, it also rotated and span out, so she went partly past the pillar and didn't have quite the same crash forces applied to her as happened to the people sitting on the left. If she'd been wearing a seatbelt, she'd have had a fair chance of surviving even this extreme accident. But, unbelted, she was thrown forward to strike the back of the front passenger seat, the door pillar, and then was tossed around after the main accident took place and the vehicle span out. There's one more thing that's obvious, that, you know, belted or unbelted, with almost total probability, if there'd been a guardrail fitted in this tunnel, then all of the occupants would probably have survived. The guardrail would have deflected the car along the line of the highway, there would have been no heavy hit, and the forces would have been survivable.
O túnel é dos poucos que existem em Paris com colunas sem proteção, apesar de ser uma das principais vias públicas da cidade. 8 pessoas já morreram neste túnel nos últimos 15 anos.
You know, the driver's been blamed, the paparazzi have been blamed, there's been suggestions even that Princess Diana was blamed for not wearing her seatbelt. But what is clearly obvious to me is the responsibility of the French authorities. You have a design here that's more appropriate for the horse and carriage age. If you'd spent £10 per foot on a guardrail, 3 more people would be alive today. With this tragic accident, what we're showing is we're pushing the levels of survivability with car safety. It shows how far we've come, but it also shows in the wider aspects of safety how much further we have to go.
Há 40 anos, a segurança automóvel era uma questão que ninguém achava relevante. Nos anos 50 e 60, a América estava no topo do mundo e, consequentemente, o carro americano, literalmente falando. Num excesso de zelo, um arrojado publicitário transportou de helicóptero um Chevrolet para o cume de uma montanha, juntamente com uma modelo fascinante, para demonstrar que este carro estava em posição superior à da concorrência. Então, levantou-se vento. A aterrorizada modelo não pôde ser trazida para baixo e foi deixada sozinha na montanha, à mercê da tempestade. Foi alegado que ela teve um esgotamento nervoso devido a este incidente. Foi por pouco que se evitou um processo judicial. Mas esta foi a única mancha naquilo que se chamou a Idade de Ouro do automóvel.
Here you are, 1 mini cheeseburger.
Thank you. Let me tell you about the 50s. I love the 50s. I love my friends, I love the music, and I love the cars of the 50s. To me, it was the excitement of all time. To have these beautiful, beautiful cars that I could see, that I could touch, that I could smell, that I could feel, that I could drive.
Para os americanos dos anos 50 e 60, tudo era possível. O país era rico e a vida era fácil.
We had that freewheeling attitude in this country. We'd go anywhere, do anything, just take on the whole country. And the cars looked like that. And I think that the shapes and forms that we were dealing with, it was probably a great expression of the way people felt, the way they dressed, the way we lived, the way we acted. It was, I think it was a reflection of the theater and the kind of movies we saw in those days. Our whole culture, I think, was really pretty much explained with the types of automobiles we drove.
Era sonho americano que o resto do mundo estava ansioso por partilhar.
For on this magnificent road, the speed which can easily be reached is so great that senses may be numbed and judgment warped.
Na Grã-Bretanha, inauguravam-se as primeiras autoestradas, seguindo o modelo das autoestradas americanas. Uma tal novidade que multidões permaneciam ali durante horas a ver os carros a passar. Pela primeira vez, os motoristas britânicos podiam sentir o vento da mudança nos seus cabelos. Era tudo pouco estranho no início.
If you overshoot the turning point, don't try to do this. Reversing and turning on the motorway is an offence which could cost you £20 in a magistrate's court. If you miss your turning, you must continue along the motorway to the next exit. This is also an offence. Motorways are for motoring, not for parking and picnic parties.
A procura de carros crescia a olhos vistos depois dos anos de escassez da guerra e do racionamento. As pessoas estavam desesperadas por possuir algo com 4 rodas.
Easy. Everybody wanted the product. You didn't chase the people, they chased you. bless my soul, if a client actually asked to see what was under the bonnet, we salesmen would be horrified. They'd probably know more about it than we would.
Gosh, your new Austin Cambridge is really super duper, James.
Yeah, like a ride. We're just off.
They were buying freedom. They wanted to get out. They wanted to go down to the seaside with the kids. They wanted to go and see Granny at the weekend. Safety? We knew the cars would stop. We knew they'd steer well. I can't remember ever talking to anybody about safety in the terms we do today. They certainly never asked us, thank goodness.
O horror do que estava a acontecer nas estradas era desconhecido da maioria. Só alguns tinham uma vaga ideia.
I began to examine the safety records in this country. I found that we were killing about 45,000 people per year in auto accidents. It's roughly the same number as were killed in total during the 13 years of the Vietnam War. And yet at the time, in the early 1950s, it was thought very little could be done about that.
Na Grã-Bretanha, tal como na América, havia uma crescente percepção de que nem tudo estava bem no mundo.
In the late part of the 50s and the early 60s, we became aware really quite rapidly that road accidents were really a very major part of our work. And in fact, the word carnage is not too dramatic for that. It seems on some days that that's all we did. You ready? No?
Here we go. There's that.
The effect on the staff was a feeling of almost hopelessness, that nothing could be done to stop this.
The motor car knock you over?
We very soon became aware that the whole culture in this and other countries was that the car was simply too precious, and consumer groups, civil liberties groups, road organisations were very, very deeply against and very effectively against any changes that would actually reduce what was clearly carnage. And that was very distressing for us. It seemed that the car was just too important to everybody's life.
As pessoas estavam a morrer em acidentes de aviação, mesmo à pequena velocidade de 20 km/h. O que se passaria? O professor Murray Mackay, da Universidade de Birmingham, organizou uma das primeiras equipas de investigação de acidentes a nível mundial para descobrir o que se passa. Estes cemitérios de carros tornaram-se a sua segunda casa.
I've always been interested in cars. I'm trained as a mechanical engineer. Both of my parents were doctors, so I grew up in a house where the human body and injuries was a everyday dinner table conversation, and that's how I got interested in the biomechanics of injuries. So I wasn't interested in what caused the accident. I was interested in the features inside the car, designed into the car, that were killing and injuring people. And this was something that the manufacturers were really not interested in. The whole focus of the thinking at that time, traditionally, was in preventing accidents taking place, doing something about the nut behind the wheel, doing something about driving standards and education. And the idea of crash protection, crashworthiness in cars, was a totally new idea.
Nos Estados Unidos da América, estes mausoléus mecânicos eram perseguidos por outro tipo de investigador. As leis de proteção do consumidor tinham feito surgir peritos como Byron Block na procura de irregularidades nos veículos que tinham morto ou ferido os seus clientes. O seu testemunho viria a ser usado em tribunal.
This is a 1956 Buick made by General Motors, and this is just like a car that my family owned in the 1950s. Let me show you some of the real safety hazards in this car, and this was typical of tens of millions of cars produced throughout the 1950s. First of all, the steering column is just like a harpoon. It'll ram into your chest, and to further aggravate that problem, look at the knife-like blades of the steering wheel that also will serve to cut into your chest and your neck and your face in a frontal crash. And remember, the car had no seat belts, so invariably you're going to go forward in a frontal crash, and this was lethal. Also, the ignition switch The key that goes into that typically would slice into a driver's kneecap, would shatter the kneecap. Very lethal. Many other knobs and protrusions in the car would also punch holes in people in frontal crashes. This padded instrument panel at least was a token recognition that safety was important, but beneath the very thin padding was a rigid metal edge, and that would do the damage. So it was a feeble effort at best. The rear view mirror is another wonderful design of the 50s. In a frontal crash, you would go forward, break the mirror, leaving a rigid metal spike rigidly attached, and it would split your skull open and you'd die. Another stupid design was the glove box door, which would pop open in a crash and serve as a guillotine, a knife-like edge that would slice into a child's neck. All of these features were found in just about all the cars of the 50s. These were secret defects, secret hazards. The public had no idea that these were killers hiding in their car.
Foram estes os homens que dirigiram a maior indústria de sempre, aquela que mais rapidamente cresceu e a mais excitante de todos os tempos. Trabalhavam para a Ford, a Chrysler e a General Motors, as maiores empresas do planeta. A partir das suas sedes em Detroit, dirigiam efetivamente as indústrias relacionadas com o automóvel. Aqui, falar de acidentes e de morte era um anátema. Destruía o romance e a mística ligados ao automóvel e ameaçava as vendas que cresciam constantemente. No entanto, em 1956, um homem ia sair da linha. O presidente da Ford, nessa altura, era o jovem prodígio Robert McNamara. Um dia recebeu a visita de alguns cientistas da Universidade de Cornell. Estavam a trabalhar na nova ideia de salvar vidas, que consistia em empacotar os passageiros dos automóveis como numa caixa de ovos. O problema é que não tinham dinheiro.
They were operating on a shoestring. You won't believe this, but in carrying out their packaging experiments, they were literally dropping human skulls, packaged in different ways, down the stairwells of Cornell's student dormitories. That was their lab. The amount of money they needed might have been on the order of a few $100,000. And Ford agreed to contribute, I've forgotten what, but let's say $100,000 or $200,000. Chrysler put in a few tens of thousands. GM refused.
Impressionado com a pesquisa de Cornell, McNamara colocou na estrada os primeiros carros seguros. Segundo os padrões de hoje, não eram assim tão seguros, mas em 1956 era quase uma heresia.
Lifeguard padding on the instrument panel and sun visors of the 1956 Ford. Ford offers this padding because statistics show 38% of accident injuries to front seat passengers are caused by being thrown forward against hard interior surfaces. You can also have these optional nylon seat belts, 1/3 stronger than airline requirements. All these safety features add up to exclusive lifeguard design, a Ford first for safety first.
Assim que os modelos de 1956 saíram da linha de montagem, a direção da Ford recebeu um telefonema. Era da General Motors, o gigante da indústria. Um administrador exigia que a Ford desistisse da campanha de segurança de McNamara. Poderia prejudicar as vendas de automóveis. Tal era o poder da General Motors que o aviso foi levado a sério.
GM feared it would lead to a reduction in automotive sales. It sounds absurd to you. It certainly sounded absurd to me. But they believed it so strongly, they put tremendous pressure on Ford to force a reduction in our emphasis on safety. They thought it would take the romance, if you will, out of car buying. Insane.
And here is Ford's new LifeGuard steering wheel. Watch what happens when these two tangle. What a wallop! But he wasn't injured because the steering wheel cushioned the shock.
And his body never touched the steering post.
A campanha foi posta de lado. McNamara saiu para assumir a posição de secretário de Estado da Defesa e para combater na guerra do Vietnã. Em Detroit, a antiga ordem foi restabelecida. Só cerca de 2 décadas mais tarde, alguém tentou fazer algo semelhante.
Can we make it? That's always a very important thing. And how you're going to make it? Just get down and put something on the paper, which I'm trying to do right now.
Na Grã-Bretanha, a maior mudança na história do automobilismo começava a tomar forma.
Everything was in utmost secrecy. No one was allowed into, apart from those few who were working on it, no one's allowed into the department at all. If you try and finish drawing it, you might recognise it. It's a Mini.
O Mini, o chamado carro do século. Foi desenhado por Alec Issigonis, o designer de carros mais carismático e intratável da Grã-Bretanha.
Issigonis had got that many ideas so fast. It was a bit of a job to keep up with him. It was a challenge. But he always insisted on the word elegance. Style to him was a bit of an anathema, I think. A car was a functional instrument, like a hammer.
John Shepard deu forma à mais louca ideia de Issigonis. Um carro com o motor colocado lateralmente, comandando as rodas da frente, que eram minúsculas, e colocadas nos cantos do carro, de forma a ter o maior espaço interior possível. O Mini foi construído numa altura de racionamento de gasolina e pretendia rivalizar com outros pequenos carros estrangeiros. Os jornalistas esperavam um carrinho de cidade, um saco de compras com rodas. Mas na apresentação à imprensa, descobriram que tinham nas mãos um carro de corrida.
We were watching these press people going around, very daintily they were going, and I said, come on, let's show them what we can do with this thing. We took one of them each, whipped it around, go to the corner, back again, but 3 laps there, put the wheels back in the pound there, and walked away. As we walked away, Issigonis has obviously seen us do it, and he came and gave us a bollocking for it. But damage had been done. Presby was seeing what we were doing. Of course, they are going to beat us. Off they went, back and forth. All I know is those 10 cars all needed a complete new set of tyres around there. They ripped the lot off.
O Mini foi verdadeiramente revolucionário. Representou tudo aquilo que havia de melhor a nível do design britânico. Mas também herdou os vícios de outros pequenos carros britânicos daquele tempo. Chegou a ultrapassar os defeitos dos outros devido ao seu tamanho. Alguns ferimentos começaram a repetir-se vezes sem conta, e a nova equipa do professor Mackay, ao investigar os acidentes de automóvel, começou a descobrir porquê.
Supposing you have a rollover accident at night time. In this car you've got the filler neck to the fuel tank that's sticking out a long way. So in a roll it just gets sheared off. You've got free fuel coming out, you've got an electrical source, you've got a fire, you get lots of people burnt to death. And here you've got a door latch design, which is just like a door latch in a house, so that if the side of the car gets stretched, the door will just swing open, people will be ejected, they'll get fatal and serious head and neck injuries from landing on the ground. You've got a seat that is just attached at the front, it hinges, nothing to hold it down at the back, so that people in the rear will come shooting forward, the people in the front will be crushed by the weight of the occupants behind. You've got a really short nose on the vehicle, so that in a frontal impact, the engine comes back, the transverse bulkhead comes back, you get really serious disabling injuries to the feet and the ankles and the lower legs from that design. So I said some fairly unpleasant things about this little car in the local press and elsewhere, and I had a summons to go to Longbridge to see Alec Issigonis, the designer of the car. And he was a dominant senior engineer at the time. He put me on the carpet in front of his desk, and he said, young man, I design my cars that have got such good brakes, such good steering and handling, that if somebody gets into a crash, it's their own fault. And I thought this was a particularly stupid approach to have, and I told him in no uncertain terms what I thought, so we had a good stand-up row about it. And of course, one of the things that happened, you know, to the Mini was that it couldn't meet the early safety standards in North America. It had to be withdrawn, and thus it was a failure. because there was no market for it in the best market in the world.
Para corrigir os problemas que surgiram inicialmente e para garantir que o Mini tivesse os padrões de segurança exigidos, 40 anos depois de se ter tornado num dos carros mais vendidos de todos os tempos.
The history in this case is a combination of criminal irresponsibility and innocent death.
Por volta de 1960, o número de acidentes estava descontrolado. Só na América, o número de mortos tinha aumentado para 50.000 por ano, algo nunca antes verificado.
He had no excuse. He never will have one for a family left motherless through no fault of her own.
Farto de assistir a cenas como esta, um estudante de Princeton com 21 anos começou a escrever sobre segurança automóvel.
I used to hitchhike a great deal, and one time I saw a particularly gruesome crash where the head of a young child had been decapitated, and I realized that the sharp edge of the glove compartment door was the instrument.
O estudante era filho de imigrantes libaneses, chamava-se Ralph Nader. Estas eram as primeiras frases da sua tese de final de curso.
For over half a century, the automobile has brought death, injury, and inestimable sorrow and deprivation to millions of people.
Quando uma editora decidiu publicar um livro sobre segurança automóvel, um jornalista sugeriu Nader. A sua tese de mestrado tornou-se no livro Unsafe at Any Speed, que veio incomodar bastante a indústria automóvel. Vendeu milhões de exemplares e tornou Nader bastante conhecido. A indústria automóvel era como um deus. Ninguém se tinha atrevido a criticá-la antes. Tal como David enfrentou Golias, Nader fez frente à General Motors e a um dos seus carros mais famosos, o Corvair.
The Corvair was a uniquely unstable car. It had its engine in the rear, and it had a suspension system that on cornering maneuvers induced the wheels to tuck under, as the saying was, and to destabilize it and to roll over the car. You had to be an extraordinarily skilled driver to anticipate something like this, or a very lucky driver. I thought to lead the book, Unsafe Any Speed, with the Corvair was a proper attention grabber and a proper signal that there were going to be names named, company names and make and models named.
Unsafe at Any Speed, perigoso a qualquer velocidade, foi publicado em novembro de 1965. Alguns dias depois, Nader recebeu um convite da General Motors para ir a Detroit.
I was offered a job twice by a vice president saying, why don't you come to work for GM and put your ideas to work. They were trying to feel me out, see whether I was for sale. And little did I know that at the time that they had hired a private detective to get dirt on me in order to discredit me, and several private detectives tailing me around the country. They set women to accost me and to try to get me in compromising situations. And they followed me down to the U.S. Senate office building in Washington.
No interior do edifício do Senado, detetives privados perderam Nader de vista e procuraram nos corredores com uma urgência crescente. Por fim, aproximaram-se de um guarda, perguntando-lhe se tinha visto Nader. O guarda, desconfiado, pediu-lhes a identificação. O segredo tinha sido revelado. Uma vez que Nader era testemunha nas sessões do Senado sobre segurança automóvel que decorriam na altura, o incidente foi visto não apenas como um escândalo, mas como um crime. O presidente da General Motors dirigiu-se ao Senado para dar uma explicação com alguma relutância.
I am not here to excuse, condone or justify in any way our investigating Mr. Nader. To the extent that General Motors bears responsibility, I want to apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader.
Era um ponto de viragem. O presidente Johnson decretou novas leis para controlar os fabricantes de carros. A indústria, que pensava nunca errar, via-se agora acusada de um insensível desrespeito pela vida humana.
Over the Labor Day weekend, 29 American servicemen died in Vietnam. During the same Labor Day weekend, 614 Americans died on our highways in automobile accidents. 29 on the battlefield, 614 on the highways. In this century, more than 1,500,000 of our fellow citizens have died on our streets and our highways. Nearly 3 times as many Americans as we've lost in all of our wars.
Isto deu origem a quarto de século de conflitos com a indústria que anteriormente ditava as regras. Nader tinha dado início à era de proteção ao consumidor, a revolta organizada daqueles que se sentiam indefesos perante as poderosas empresas. E tudo isto atingiu o seu auge em meados dos anos 70.
When I bought my Pinto, I figured it was a good value, but I didn't know how good until my dad started borrowing it.
So I ended up buying my own.
Then I bought one, and I bought one.
And I bought one.
And we bought 2.
Join the Pinto family.
This is the famous Pinto emblem that appeared in magazines and newspapers. This is the famous Pinto shape. But what made the Pinto truly infamous was the rear end. And that's where the fuel tank is located. And as you see, it is very close to the rear bumper, and in a rear impact, it gets crushed against the rear axle. The tank gets punctured, ruptured, fuel gets ignited, and there are infernos that have burned up people over the years.
Várias pessoas sofreram queimaduras em acidentes com Pintos, mas o caso mais célebre foi o de Richard Grimshaw, contra a empresa Ford Motor da Califórnia.
Richard Grimshaw was a young boy, and he was a passenger in a Pinto that was rear impacted, ironically enough, by another Ford. The car burst into flames, and Richard Grimshaw had his face melted, his body melted, his hands and fingers melted. It was a tragedy beyond belief.
Byron Block começou a arranjar provas para o julgamento ao examinar Pintos que tinham ardido. Mas a prova mais eficaz de todas acabou por ser um documento por ele exposto. Uma carta da Ford especificando a razão por nada terem feito acerca do problema do depósito de combustível. De acordo com esse documento, cerca de 180 pessoas poderiam vir a morrer queimadas e outras 180 teriam ferimentos graves, o que custaria à empresa cerca de 50 milhões de dólares em indemnizações. Contudo, o preço de reparação dos automóveis a 11 dólares cada um poderia atingir os 137 milhões de dólares.
Therefore, Ford argued, it was cheaper to let them burn. And it was that corporate attitude that convinced the jury to award $125 million in punitive damages as punishment to Ford Motor Company for that attitude of trading off human lives for a few dollars of profit.
O caso Pinto foi ponto de viragem ao expor o cinismo comercial da indústria automóvel. O aviso correu à volta do mundo. A partir de então, a segurança não podia ser ignorada. Quando se começou a exigir carros mais seguros, ninguém tinha uma ideia nítida de como fazer. Muito pouco se sabia acerca dos efeitos de um impacto no corpo humano, até que ponto o condutor conseguiria resistir. Mas para descobrir isto, uma experiência considerada pouco louca foi levada a cabo no deserto do Novo México pela Força Aérea dos Estados Unidos em 1954. O cientista John Stepp amarrou-se a trenó foguetão para corajosamente ir até onde nenhum homem tinha ido antes.
He started the countdown. 10, 9, adrenaline comes in and the heart begins to beat a little faster. Then just as he reaches 0, you get this enormous ram against your back and feel totally helpless. You're being given the biggest kick that could be delivered.
Stepp foi impulsionado a uma velocidade de 632 milhas por hora e parou daí a 1,4 segundos. Nunca ninguém fora sujeito a tal teste, nem voltaria a acontecer.
I couldn't see anything, and I was looking around, and I was beginning to think about seeing-eye dogs and white canes. And I was thinking to myself, now I've paid my dues. I've gotten there. I've shown them what they want to know, and from now on, life is going to be good.
John Stepp testou os limites da resistência humana e mostrou que, devidamente amarrado, o condutor poderia sobreviver a forças quase inimagináveis. A 10 mil quilómetros de distância, engenheiros suecos trabalharam com um ovo e chegaram à mesma conclusão. Os cintos de segurança em triângulo, introduzidos pela Volvo em 1959. A Volvo patenteou a descoberta, mas permitiu que todos a usassem de graça.
Inside the car, without belts, we all tumbled about like popcorn.
Os primeiros cintos de segurança foram acompanhados por uma enorme campanha de publicidade. Os anúncios eram arrepiantes, os acidentes espetaculares, mas não tiveram qualquer efeito.
Really, almost nobody I know wears seatbelts. That's the truth.
I find it inconvenient.
I don't see where you need them, really, to drive carefully.
I don't like to feel so tied down.
Mostly they're a pain in the neck.
O terror nas estradas não desaparecia. Em 1967, o governo britânico agiu, um projeto-lei para tornar obrigatório o uso do cinto de segurança. Houve grandes protestos, o início de uma luta que iria durar 16 anos. O debate sobre segurança mais importante do século XX. Muitos acreditavam ser uma invasão dos seus direitos.
Any intrusion into civil liberties was not going to be condoned by the people. These were things to be guarded. Perhaps in those early days there was a feeling of, damn you, I'll go to the devil my own way. I am master of my own destiny. If I don't want to wear a seatbelt and get thrown out of my car and killed, that's my responsibility.
Go on blowing, sister.
Toda a propaganda fora em vão. Os sinistros continuaram a ocorrer, sem fim à vista. Por 9 vezes a proposta de lei foi apresentada ao Parlamento. 9 vezes foi rejeitada.
Thank you.
300 mils of soda Vic.
That'll do.
Nas salas de urgência dos hospitais, a situação era assustadora.
I can well remember a young child who travelled in the front seat of a parent's car early one evening to go and buy something for supper, the English dish of fish and chips, and there was a collision, local street, low traffic speed and so forth, but a collision sufficient to throw her through the windscreen of that car because seat belts were not in vogue in those days. She was brought here, had instantly lost the sight of both eyes, and it was unsavable. The trauma for that child was huge, and it would affect her for the whole of her life.
Os motoristas britânicos sentiam que alguém lhes retirava a liberdade, e esse alguém era uma mulher.
To have a woman come along and tell them they must wear a seatbelt was intolerable. I used to get angry, almost life-threatening letters from indignant men who deeply resented having a woman Minister of Transport, particularly as that woman did not drive herself. They were having a love affair with their cars, weren't they? And the bigger and more beautiful, the better.
This was the new great release, the great opportunity, the great purchase that young men were going to make. They wanted to be free. They didn't want a lot of rules and regulations. It was certainly not proposed by a woman, that's for sure. Barbara Castle, damn it, a woman impinging upon the motor car and the motor car business. Oh dear, that wasn't a good thing.
Falar nas crianças acabou por ser a solução. Ninguém suportava cenas como esta, de crianças feridas e a sofrer. Quando foi então proposta a lei, obrigando as crianças a usar cinto, nem os opositores mais intransigentes conseguiram discordar. Quando ficou demonstrado que isto podia salvar vidas, a oposição desintegrou-se. Em 1983, o uso de cinto de segurança tornou-se obrigatório para todas as pessoas na Grã-Bretanha. Imediatamente as mortes na estrada diminuíram um quarto. Veio a revelar-se o equipamento de segurança com maior índice de êxito jamais inventado.
Nag yourself to remember this drill. Clunk the car door and click the seatbelt. Clunk, click, every trip.
Os britânicos tinham sido convencidos, mas os americanos vieram a mostrar-se muito mais inflexíveis. Apenas 1 em cada 20 americanos se dava ao trabalho de usar o cinto de segurança. Gastaram-se milhões na tentativa de mudar a opinião pública. Tudo em vão.
What's the first thing that goes through your mind in a head-on if you're not wearing a safety belt?
The steering wheel. All in favor of wearing safety belts, raise your hand.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Mas então, milagrosamente, o problema foi resolvido. Um novo equipamento maravilhoso surgiu, o airbag. Para os americanos, o airbag era a melhor das panaceias. Já não importava se o condutor usava ou não o cinto de segurança. O airbag salvá-lo-ia mesmo assim. Todos os testes incluíam o novo airbag maravilha nos carros, até mesmo nos aviões. Não parecia existir um limite para os locais onde estes poderiam ser colocados. No início dos anos 70, o primeiro fabricante de carros estava pronto.
This is a 1973 Chevrolet. It's the world's first production airbag car made by General Motors. It has an airbag for the driver and an airbag for the right front passenger as well. If we had had these kind of airbags all these years, this last quarter of a century, all of the cars you see around us in this wrecking yard, most of those drivers and passengers in the front seat would have walked away instead of being killed or horribly injured.
Contudo, a Chevrolet abandonou o seu airbag um ano mais tarde, alegando que os seus clientes não o queriam. Quando o governo americano propôs tornar obrigatórios os airbags, a indústria lutou com unhas e dentes. No século XX, esta viria a ser a última batalha sobre segurança. Os fabricantes de automóveis foram conduzidos por Lee Iacocca, o patrão da Ford, e uma forte personalidade. Iacocca chegou a ir à Casa Branca para discutir com o governo, alegando que estes airbags estão a matar os nossos lucros. Convenceu-os a adiar a legislação. Quando Iacocca se mudou para a Chrysler, continuou aí a sua luta.
We're not doing anything on airbags because we don't believe in them. I haven't believed in them for 2 decades because of all the problems.
Mas Iacocca estava prestes a perder a batalha. Em 1984, graças à pressão de Ralph Nader, a agência responsável pela compra de todos os carros do governo estipulou que os airbags eram obrigatórios. Para espanto de todos, a Ford passou à frente de todos, mostrou-se interessada no contrato e começou a instalar airbags o mais rapidamente possível. Iacocca foi contrariado nesta jogada, mas não por muito tempo.
Ford, GM and Honda won't have airbags in all their cars until 1994. By that time, approximately 60,000 airbags will have deployed in Chrysler-built vehicles.
A Chrysler viria a instalar mais airbags e com mais rapidez do que qualquer outra empresa do mundo.
I couldn't believe it. This car started coming right at me. I stood on the brakes and bam!
Os airbags eram de repente uma proposta comercial e Iacocca, o seu admirador número 1.
Saved your life. Chrysler puts an airbag in every car we build in the U.S. Japanese automakers don't. An airbag can make a real difference. Right, Ron? That's right.
Com a rendição do líder da oposição aos airbags dentro da indústria, a guerra tinha terminado. Por volta de 1990, todos os fabricantes tentavam instalar o maior número possível, mas os problemas de que todos estavam conscientes por volta dos anos 70 não tinham desaparecido. Kyle Lehman, de 6 anos de idade. A mãe fez um vídeo amador quando Kyle acabou a pré-primária. O filho é hoje uma das figuras principais no mais controverso dilema de segurança que os americanos enfrentam.
We were leaving the house to go to swim lessons, and Kyle was strapped in the front seat, and Cody was in the back in his car seat. We took a gravel road, and going around the curve, we hit head-on with another vehicle, and the airbags inflated. I just remember the real loud sound in my head, feeling funny, and the smell, and it was quiet, and I got Cody out of the car, because after I got out, Cody was crying, and I got him out of the car, and then it was quiet. And all I remember is Kyle from the neck up, the mark on his neck. And he was dead. I just remember my baby being dead.
É uma tragédia americana. Enquanto quase todos os europeus usam cinto de segurança, 1/3 dos americanos ainda não o faz. Por isso, os seus airbags têm de ser suficientemente fortes para proteger um adulto que não use cinto. O airbag americano projeta-se a cerca de 300 km/h. Para uma criança inclinada para a frente para mudar a estação de rádio ou sentada na ponta do assento, como as crianças normalmente fazem, é um perigo mortal. Os modernos airbags já mataram cerca de 60 americanos, na sua maioria crianças. Mas esta tragédia tende a ocultar o facto de que, nos anos 90, algo extraordinário aconteceu. Tinha chegado a hora de considerar a segurança como uma questão importante.
What trials life will throw at you. So for your protection, every Corsa has a rigid steel safety cell.
Volvo's technologically advanced side impact protection system.
Crumple zones, front and rear, and twin side impact bars in all doors.
O lema agora é: a segurança vende carros.
The Volvo 340, tested by dummies, driven by the intelligent.
O dinheiro entrou em abundância. Cada empresa tem agora um departamento de segurança na luta pela supremacia em termos de construção e design. É um negócio bizarro de alta tecnologia, onde os carros sofrem agora colisões sem ficarem com o menor arranhão. A Renault depara-se com um bloco de cimento mal colocado.
We've seen a real sea change in terms of the acceptance of crash performance and safety design by the manufacturers. And this has come about, I think, because people are a lot more aware of it. They want to be protected and they're willing to pay for it. Safety now sells cars. So it's here to stay. And in the future, we're going to see a tremendous amount of better safety coming into vehicles.
Percorremos um longo caminho em 30 anos. Os nossos carros já são mais seguros. No entanto, é uma história de êxito sem um final feliz. Apesar do facto de ser mais difícil agora morrer num desastre de automóvel, na realidade acontece cada vez mais. A ocorrência de mortes na estrada está mais uma vez a aumentar. Tudo leva a crer que quanto mais os engenheiros fazem para tornar seguro viajar nas estradas, mais se guia de uma forma perigosa. Melhoramos os carros, mas poderemos alguma vez melhorar os condutores?